مساء الخير جميعا، مرحبا بكم في هذه الأمسية المميزة. الحديث سيكون باللغة الإنجليزية هذا المساء. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight. She's an author who is beyond any introduction, as her words and stories have reached far and wide, a talent for transporting her readers into the most intimate worlds. With books like Reading Lolita and Tehran, her memories both teach and change the reader through truth presented in her books. We are inspired to become more of who we are, and we strengthen our paths in life. We realize that as a collective human race, we carry many stories of how we are alive. I'm especially honored to welcome her today to Bahrain and to the Sheikh Ibrahim Center for Culture and Research to listen to her experiences, her insights. Athar Nafisi, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
And
thank you,
yours.
First of all, some of you might have been wondering about my shawl. Okay. Now, this shawl was given to me last night by this wonderful, amazing woman. I don't know where Aisha is. And I'm carrying it around from now on as my good luck shawl. So wanted to show off to you before starting my talk. This is not going to be really a talk because the experience, I just wanted to say to you before saying anything else that the experience I have had these past 24 hours in Bahrain has been like I have lived here in this country for 24 years. And what I can tell you about the way I felt that this is a country and a people with kindness and beauty. This mixture is a very dangerously wonderful mixture. Kindness and beauty, which you have offered. And today, our guardian, I don't know where Esmeralda is, she took us for a tour of all the houses of Bahrain, and I marvel at this uniqueness of beauty in this city. I mean, it is such an amazing combination of the old and the new. You must have really taken roots in the old to be able to create such new things. You know, and tradition and modernity. This mixture is just Bahraini. It is universal, but it is Bahrain. And that is something that was so very amazing for me. And the last but not least is that genuine, true beauty is always mixed with the heart. It has to come from the heart. That is where art comes from. I remember, I love the book Little Prince. And you remember what the fox says to the Little Prince. One of the things he says, one sees clearly only with the heart. Anything essential is hidden. And, you know, Antoine Saint-Exupéry, the writer of Little Prince, lived in 20th century, but centuries before them. And this is the role of imagination. This is what literature is all about. It breaks the boundaries of time and space. So a man named Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, all of a sudden, makes connection to a man named Antoine Saint-Exupéry, who has lived centuries and thousands of miles away from him. Maulana, I'm presumptuous enough to translate Maulana. Can you imagine what kind of a person I am? Rumi says, open the eye of the heart to see the soul, to make visible that which is invisible. And this is the role of music, of art and ideas and imagination. So tonight I thought you gave your heart to us these past hours, both the conversation we had last night with Sheikh I don't know where you are, Sheikh. Thank you so much for just being. Thank you. And all the other wonderful women, and the two wonderful and very courageous men who joined us. You gave your heart to me, and I want to not give a lecture to you, but I want to share my heart with you. So this is not a lecture. It is a sharing of hearts, really. And all day today, whenever I go to a lecture, whenever I go to a talk, the first thing that comes to my mind is that one of the best things that books do is they connect you to people you should be connected to. Usually you're connected to people because you were born into the family, or for your job, or they're your neighbors, or you have to meet them in, parties. But people who love books, people who read books, they are immediately connected through this common and shared passion. And it is amazing thing about passion is what turns strangers into what I call the intimate strangers. All of a sudden, someone you had never met before, you had never seen in your life, becomes intimate with you. You begin talking about your favorite books, and soon enough you're telling them about your children and where you live and what films you like. You become intimate strangers. Had I not written a book, I would not be here in this amazing country. Had I not written a book, I would not be sharing my heart with you. Had I not written a book, I would not have known that Bahrain was once called Delman, and it had the precarious and amazing job of being Firdaus and Jannat. My goodness, the reality of what Bahrain is, combined with the lights and shades of paradise. This must make this country feel unique. The name itself makes it unique. And so I would have missed being in this amazing institute, in this amazing building, which in itself is a work of art, paying homage to and celebrating ideas and imagination, or what I call Republic of Imagination. Now, people ask me, what do you mean by Republic of Imagination? I come to a place like this and I say, this is what I mean by a Republic of Imagination. Reality constantly imposes limitations on us. Every step you take, there is a rule of how you should behave, what you should do. There is only one space where there is no limitations, where reality cannot impose its rules and its boundaries and its red lines. And it is in the Republic of Ideas and Imagination. There, in that republic, you transcend the boundaries of nationality, language, race, gender, religion, ethnicity. And the only passport, you don't need a passport or an identification card to enter a place like this. All you need to have to come to a place like this is love of imagination and ideas. And this republic, we live in a very materialistic world where everybody says, culture, books, music, it's something to escape into. What they don't understand is that culture, ideas, imagination are what make us human. Stories have existed with us since the dawn of history. And I don't know about Bahrain, but in America, nowadays they segregate science and technology from literature and humanities saying that science and technology make more money. That is such degradation of science and technology because of the fact that both science and literature and art are based on one of the basic tenets of being human, namely curiosity. Curiosity is that sensual urge to want to know, that urge to come out of yourself, to leave your skin and go under the skin of someone else. That is what curiosity is all about. It is always about knowledge. It's about investigating what you don't know. How boring it is. Again, in my country now, America, one of the things, I don't know if, I know there are some British in this room. I don't know if this is what is happening in Britain as well. But in America, one of the things that happens is, I kept thinking that I should not be talking so much about America, but I will. The whole idea that science and technology are separate from literature and arts. They are both about investigation. Just let's bring two examples. I mean, science investigates what is unknown in the world, what is unknown in nature, because without that investigation of nature, we wouldn't be here today. We need that connection to nature. We need that relation to nature. And what stories do, they bring continuity. You want to know about what is called the East. Where do you go? Look at the tales of 1001 Nights. You immediately identify with them, identify with those stories both on a local level as part of your inheritance and tradition, but also on a much larger universal level. Think of Shahrazad and 1001 Nights, and think of the fact that these stories, we don't know who the narrators are. And they come from all over the world. The stories don't belong to one nation, they belong to Arabia, Persia, India, even the Europeans added to it. So, and it doesn't matter who wrote them, who told them. What matters is that these tales are here with us today. And at the heart of Shahrazad's story is the idea of curiosity. The fact that what is wrong with the king? What is wrong with the king is that he does not want to know. That when the queen betrays him, he immediately kills her. She never explains, she's silent. And from then on, he generalizes all women. If the queen is bad, then all women are bad. And therefore I must kill all women. And have you ever noticed why one of those virgins doesn't take a knife to bed with her? I mean, she's going to die anyway. Why doesn't she take a knife to bed and kill the king? Well, there is wisdom in this. Because by killing one king, you do not erase tyranny. Another tyrant king can come. You have to change and cure the king. You have to change the mindset of the king. And in order to do that, what does Shahrazad do? Curiosity. She makes the king curious, tells a story, stops at the point where the king wants to know what happens next. And the next morning, she's still alive. And another story, and another story. So the king, through the stories, learns that the world is not black and white. that some queens betray, but not all queens betray, that some kings are good, but not all kings are good. The world is various. You cannot generalize. Last night, with Khalifa May, we remember we talked about the importance of details, of individuals. Nabokov used to say, worship the details, the divine details. Every individual is different from every other individual. And so we have to judge them and connect to them on their terms as individuals. So the whole point about Shahrazad then is curiosity. And the other thing that is so important in the Republic of Imagination is immediately after curiosity. I'm going to go back to America because I forgot what I wanted to say. Every time in America nowadays, in universities, and perhaps in Britain too, nowadays they say everybody should talk about themselves. Like if you are a woman from Middle East, from a Muslim majority country, you only talk about women from Middle East, from Muslim majority countries. If you are a white male and still alive, you talk about white alive males. If you are African American, you talk about African Americans. And I say, how boring. This is so boring to constantly want to talk about yourself, to write about yourself, to teach about yourself, to read about yourself. How arrogant to want to be like that, to not want to know the world outside, the variety of the world, to not want to know the stranger within you. Because through writing, people think that writers write because they know everything that they want to write. I don't know how many writers are in this room, but I know one amazing artist, Hala, now you've gone, I can't see you. But anyway, writers, artists don't know everything about what they want to write. They have an idea, they have an obsession, it keeps them awake at nights. They say, I have to do something with it. It's like falling in love, when you fall in love and then you say, I just don't know what to do. In the middle of the night, you wake up and think about him. In the middle of the night, we writers wake up and think about ideas. And we discover the stranger within us, not just the strangers outside. And so when I come to a place like this, and I go and look at the pictures of all those people who have been here before me from all over the world, I think that you have embraced the world. You have brought the universe into this building. And now I'm going to finish with Shahrazad and go to another matter. Now with Shahrazad, once she makes the king curious, then the king finds empathy. And empathy is the other aspect of being human. I mean, could you live in the world for 1 second without connecting to others? It's impossible. You need to be connected. And you need to know others. Novel is one of the most democratic forms of writing because of the fact that it gives voice to everyone, even the villain. Novel is not about revenge and judgment, it's about understanding and empathy. A great novelist, like a great general, knows that even if you want to defeat the enemy, you need to know. You need to understand the enemy. You need to be in the mind of the enemy in order to do it. So what I thought I would do, I don't know how much time because, you know, I always say that it's democratic to, we're all democratic before we get to the podium. Then we want to monopolize the podium. And you poor audience sitting there, my prisoners, you know. I hope Esperanza would go like this, or go like this, so that I would know. But what I wanted to do for the rest of the evening, having talked about the Republic of Imagination, is to talk a little bit about the story behind my stories, the story behind my books, and why I got to love so much. I think that book saved my life. I don't know what my life would have been like had I not been in love with one thing in the world that no one could take away from me. So I thought I'd go to the story, and my story begins in a very small room in a city named Tehran, in a country that used to be called Iran. My family, I mentioned in my books that my family, the only thing they were snobbish about was knowledge. I mean, in my family, we would say things like, oh, he doesn't read. My brother and I used to go to parties with books in our hands, you know, showing off as if people cared that we read books, you know. And my father always used to tell us that worldly possessions can be taken away from you. You cannot trust the world and the possessions of the world. But knowledge will stay loyal to you. It will always be there. And in our household, every time there was an Eid and we wanted to celebrate, or if we had done something good, my parents would give us books. So we learned that books are gifts and they're awards and they should be revered. Now, when I was about 3.5 years old or so, my father started to tell me stories at night. And I mentioned in the Republic of, I want to say it in Arabic, Jumhuriyat al-Khiyar. Yes. In that book, I mentioned that my father was also very democratic about telling stories. One night, we would visit the magic land of Shahrazad and 1001 Nights. The next night, we would go and visit our epic poet Ferdowsi and the Book of Kings. The next night, we would fly to France with the Little Prince, go to Britain with Alice in Wonderland, jump and go take a train to Denmark from Britain, to Little Match Girl and Ugly Duckling, go to America with the Wizard of Oz. So when I was that young, I instinctively realized that all I have to do is to be in my small room in Tehran, and the world will come to me. And I have never, ever forgotten the joy of bringing the world into my little room and being the king, the queen of that room. So all these countries I later saw, I had already seen them in my imagination. When I first went to England, I had been there. I had traveled with Alice. I had jumped that hole. I learned courage from Alice. Not every little girl would run after a rabbit that talks and has a waistcoat. Some little girls become frightened of rabbits like that. Not every little girl instinctively jumps down the hole. So I learned courage from Alice, and I learned to love England through Alice. But anyway, that's another story. Now, when I was about 6 and 7, I think that you, like Iran, your Fridays are like the holidays, the vacation. My father, on Friday mornings, a lot of times, would take me for a walk, a long walk. And at the end of that walk, either we would go to a bookstore or to an ice cream shop. And he would take me to the ice cream shop. So one day he told me, you're now old enough to know about your country and about your family. And he said, this country is very ancient, and it has been invaded, and it has been attacked so many times. It has changed in so many ways. But what keeps this country and its identity alive, it is poetry. That for 1,000 years, Iranians have read Ferdowsi and have kept it in their hearts. In Iran, people might be illiterate, might not be able to read, but they know Hafiz and Sa'di and Khayyam and Ferdowsi by heart. In coffee shops, in traditional coffee shops, they play Ferdowsi, and when my daughter came into the world, we opened Hafiz to ask him what her fate would be. And her name, Negar, is taken from Hafiz, from a poem by Hafiz. So he told me that our family it goes back to 15th century. A medicine man and a writer, a philosopher named Burhanuddin Nafis. And he said that his books are still in existence today. And for 14 generations, the Nafisis have either been men and women of knowledge. Would you say ilm? Alim? Alim. He said that they were alims. And he said, that is what I want you to remember about the family. And I do understand that the importance of the fact that science and literature go together. Think of one of the greatest scientists of our time, Einstein. He played music, like many other scientists we know, and he said that imagination was even more important than scientific knowledge because imagination encircles the world. Talk about making money. Think of Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs and all those young men like Bill Gates who somehow lived in a garage. I don't know why they were all living in garages. It's still not known. They did not make Microsoft or Apple. I'm sorry, I keep talking about the British. I just saw it. They talk, these people didn't say, let's go and make Apple or invent Microsoft because we want to become multi-billionaires. That's the way to it. The multi-billionaires were not like Steve Jobs at that time. They were more like Donald Trump. So the whole point here is that they had passion. They couldn't sleep at nights either because they wanted to create something new. And Steve Jobs dropped out from university and started going to a class only on the most useless subject in the university, which was calligraphy. And through calligraphy, he made the Apple logo. So even if you want your children to be billionaires, you don't teach them not to read and write and appreciate art. You tell them exactly the opposite. You tell them that imagination encircles the world. That is what you do. And talking about Ibn Sina, we haven't talked about Ibn Sina yet, but I'm going to. Talking about these people, my father told me about Omar Khayyam. And he said Omar Khayyam was both a great astronomer, mathematician, philosopher, but also a great poet. And he talked about Al-Farabi. And he said he too was a great philosopher, but also in love with music and wrote a book on music. And you know, I thought about that later on in life. And especially recently, I keep going back to those alims. And I keep thinking, you know, not only did they understand the relationship between philosophy, science, and poetry, but also they had such a live exchange with ideas in the world. Think of the golden age of Islam. I'm not an expert in it, so you must excuse me, but I know very little about it, and the very little that I know excites me a great deal. And that is why I say think of Abu Sina. Ibn Sina was the father. I made a list, which I'll just go over so that I won't take your time. Well, Ibn Sina was called the father of modern medicine and the most influential philosopher of pre-modern times. He was influenced by, they didn't have any worries the way we do now in the academia today, who they take from. So he was very much influenced by the Aristotelian philosophy. And he in turn influenced the Enlightenment philosophers in the West. Al-Farabi, who we talked about, he was influenced by Plato, Aristotle, and Ptolemy, and he was called the second teacher after Aristotle, who was the first teacher. And he also saved the original Greek writings of Plato and Aristotle through his commentaries. So you see, it was from the East that the West was again introduced to its ancestors, to its intellectual ancestors. Al-Kindi, who was father of Arab philosophy and a physician and a musician who was influenced by Socrates and Hellenistic philosophy. We can go on forever. And the West was influenced by the Eastern thought. I mean, just think of Fitzgerald's translation of Omar al-Khayyam, Matthew Arnold's Rostam and Sohrab, Goethe's East-West Divan. I mean, it can go on and on. Now, I ask, why can't we have a world like that? That is the question. And I think that in a place like this, we ask this question and we should answer it by actively becoming engaged. Not just, today, we're only engaged with the world through wars. We should start getting engaged with the world through its stories, through its music, through its films, which is what the Iranian youth did when they were deprived of the world. So to make this long story short, I go from my little room to a place that was called the airport in Tehran. I mentioned in reading Lolita, I was the brat, 13-year-old brat, running around the Tehran airport saying, I don't want to go, because my parents thought it is important for her to go and be independent. So they put me in a plane with my mother, and off we went to a small city in north of England called Lancaster, England. And for the first time in my life, I realized what exile means. And exile is not in the big things, it's in the little things. It's in the tone of your parents' voice. It is in the sun-drenched tomatoes and peaches. You know, in Iran, the flowers, the leaves, the fruit were filled with the sun. It snowed a lot in winter, and we were surrounded by snow-capped mountains, but we would walk in the snow and eat cream puffs. Lancaster, England was flat, no mountains. it rained day and night. It was very green and beautiful, but it rained day and night. And that was when I learned a big lesson. I learned that life is very transient, that at the drop of an eyelid, everything you call home can be taken away from you. I don't know how many migrants are here in this room, but when I live in America, it's land of migrants. And a war, a revolution, but also a tornado can take away everything you call home. So you need what Nabokov used to call a portable home. You need a home that no one can take away from you. And I took with me 3 things that were the best of Iran, and I still carry the best of Iran through the best Iran had to offer, which was its poets. I took with me a book of Hafiz, a book of Rumi, and a book of an amazing Persian poet, female poet, Furugh Farrokhzad. And at nights, if you will now know my age, in England, they have these heaters. If you sat too close to them, you really died of heat. If you sat too far from them, you died of cold. So I would go under the covers with a hot water bottle, and you know how important hot water bottles used to be in England. They are not anymore. I don't think so. But anyway, and I would read these books. This is something that I still do to this age. I cannot sleep without reading. And I knew then that I was in Iran, in the kind of Iran that no one could take away from me. So I made England my home because of what I had read in England and what I read before coming to England. I made England my home through Dickens and Fielding and Richardson and Austen and Bronte sisters and W.H. Auden and Christopher Isherwood and Henry Green. And later in America, I made America my home through Melville and Hawthorne and Emily Dickinson and Zora Neale Hurston and Mark Twain and James Baldwin. I realized that I have a portable home that I can carry with me everywhere I go. So I want to get close to the end of my story by saying that when I went to Iran, Iran had changed a great deal. But I connected to the past that we had lost through the poets, and I connected my students to literature through Western literature, to the world that they had lost. And there is a story that I had thought that I want, near the end of my talk, I want to talk about it because it's very personal to me. I talked about it in Reading Lolita, but I want to say it because I want to keep the memory of this person that I'm talking about alive. When I went first back to Iran, I taught at a girls' university for a while. And there was a girl named Razieh, who was a student of mine and who was a very small girl, very thin, and she was very religious, and she was very poor and very fierce. Her mother was a cleaning woman, and Razieh would tell me that she fell in love with Western literature. She said that when her mother went to those homes to clean, she would go and borrow books like Rebecca and Gone with the Wind. And later on, she fell in love with Jane Austen, with Hemingway, and with Kafka. But more than anyone else, she loved Henry James. She used to say she loved the women in Henry James. They were so independent, such amazing women. And I never forget, she would laugh and say, I think I am in love. And, you know, I had many talks with her about James, but then I left that university and I never saw her again. I knew that she belonged to an opposition religious group, but I did not hear from her. Then during the Cultural Revolution in Tehran, when they were closing down the universities and there were many protests, we were all in the streets protesting, many were arrested, many were executed and killed. One day I was walking down the street and I can see it right now as I speak to you. I was walking down the street and all of a sudden I saw Razieh coming from this way. And I went towards her to say hello, and she went like this, and I realized that I should not talk to her, so I passed her by. And a few years later, one of my students came to see me, and she said, you know, I was in jail, but I didn't do much, so they gave me only 5 years. I was in the same cell with 15 others, there was 15 of us, with one of your other students called Razieh. And she laughed and she said, you know what we talked about? I talked about Edward Fitzgerald and the Great Gatsby and the fact that we put him on trial at the University of Tehran. And she would talk about Hemingway and Henry James. She was in love with Henry James. And she said we would talk and laugh. And then she paused and she said, you know that Razieh was executed. And I thought, to this moment, I cannot imagine the fact that that girl, so much in love with Henry James, would be executed. And I asked myself, Henry James didn't save Razieh. Books do not save you from death, from jail, from anything that is bad in this world. But why is it that not just Razieh and Henry James, but in so many stories about the concentration camps, there's a marvelous book on this called The Extremes by the Eastern European writer Tezavan Todorov, where he talks about the concentration camps and how people over there were prepared to give the ration of their food in order to get a book. You know, that people were arrested because they were reading books, and they said that it was worth their while. Primo Levi says, I was ready to give my daily ration of soup in order to tell my cellmate about Dante. Dante doesn't save Primo Levi. Henry James doesn't save Razieh. So why do they think about them when they're at death's door? Perhaps because when you lose all your hope in humanity, when you see the worst things that humans can do to humans, and they have been doing it for thousands of years, 20th century, fascism and communism. Right now, today, as we are in this marvelous place, just think of how many people are awaiting to be executed around the world. When they lose everything, they go back maybe to hope. They go back to the best that humanity can give you. Because the novel literature is a celebration of the dignity of every individual. It is a celebration of the dignity and the right of every individual to life, liberty and pursuit of happiness. That is what literature does. It gives you hope because it is about life. Every moment, even if we're not in concentration camps, every moment we're dying. Literature becomes the guardian of our memory. It is conclusive evidence that we have lived. Life, as our poets, Persian poets, have a specialty in reminding you how fickle and transient life is. It goes just like this, the moment you least expect it. And death is absolute. But what gives us hope is the fact that someone was there to make a record of these moments. Someone was there to tell us about the past, make us aware of the present, and predict the future for us. And that is why people at death's door remember Henry James and Dante. We cannot lose hope in a world that creates a Rumi or a Shakespeare. This, in the end, is what Shahrazad does in 1001 Nights. Hope in the world despite the evil in it. And in humanity, hope in humanity despite the humanity's flaws. I want to end with hope and tell you, Khalifa May every season has a poem that begins that season with. And I want to end it with your quotation of the poem about hope. You say, "The hope is within me, coming and going, but I will not leave it." So this is the message of literature, of imagination. We will not leave hope as long as we can have a heart that bleeds with others and have a mind that thinks of others. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for having shared your heart with us. We love you too, Athar Nafisi. Welcome to our Republic of Imagination.
An amazing republic. We've been to so many republics today. All these houses that are around this amazing, amazing city.
Thank you again. We'll give the floor to your questions, please.
Or your comments.
Or your comments.
I put everyone to sleep.
I just want to ask you, this is your past experience in life regarding the whole tolerance and reading and all. But how do you spread this idea now with this big band of theology, as you can see it here? I mean,
would this
band of theology, where everything is haram, everything cannot be discussed, everything cannot be this one. I mean, if you take the movie, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which is a high imagination, where people are getting older but they are getting smaller. This is, how can you spread that you can think?
How can you say that you can think in this world?
How do you spread the idea that people can think, can see, can read? And any other thing that their beliefs, which are,
Well, there are always some people, you're here, who think and see, and their duty at times like this is to take that seeing and thinking to the rest of the world. I don't know, did I not understand?
Yeah. To spread the idea that you can think, you can be free, you can be...
I don't know how many nationalities are in this room right now, but I came, it took me 17 hours to get to this place, and I feel as if it's like my home. And I feel it's like my home not because it is really in reality my home, but because over here and in here it's my home. And I think we can do this all over the world. You can do it. That is why I was mentioning those philosophers. I think that there's a lot of potential in times like this for people with the courage to think, to come forward, and to make places like this universal, not just in Bahrain, but spread Bahrain to other parts of the world.
Please, do you feel a nostalgia for Iran? You said you lived in England. Do you feel a nostalgia for Iran? You said you lived in England, you felt English, you felt in America. Do you really feel English and American, or do you still feel Iranian?
Well, at the end of reading Lolita, I said, I left Iran, but Iran never left me. And it will never leave me. We say about the language we're born into, our mother language. Iran was the place where the first time I fell in love, the first cream puff I ate, the best ice cream I ever had, and the best poetry in the world all came from Iran. That is why when I went to America, I realized that I need a home that no one can take away from me, because tomorrow America might be taken from me. And that is why, for me, I am genuinely a citizen of the Republic of Imagination. And I think that as a citizen of the Republic of Imagination, in reality, I will have a home anywhere I go.
We would like to be compatriots.
أنت تكلمتي عن قوة الخيال. ولكن أنا لاحظت في كتبك وهو مصدر القوة الأكبر هو قدرتك على القبض على الواقع، على وصف التفاصيل الصغيرة والمشاعر والاستبصار بأفكارك.
Your books, you're related to reality.
يعني أنا رأيت أن أنت أقرب إلى وصف الواقع أكثر من التحريك في الخيال، وكانت هذه نقطة إعجابي بما تكتبينه، بقدرتك على فهم عواطفك أنت ومشاعرك وانفعالاتك وكتابتها بدقة عالية.
What you feel in reality, how you level up to it.
Thank you very much for your comments. And one thing that I wanted to say, what I wanted to do when I lived in Iran and when I left Iran was to talk about, not write an academic paper about books, but to talk about how my reality is changed through reading books and how my perception of the books change through the reality I live. So I see we cannot, it's like Alice's Wonderland. We always need that Wonderland at the back of our house.
I want to thank you for choosing America as your latest home. I think that we are very lucky to have you there. I wanted to ask you, as someone who has taught people who were so passionate about reading, how you find things these days in an era where no one teaches cursive writing anymore, everyone is speaking in abbreviated language. Do you find that younger students still have the same passion, and you can still sort of ignite that in them as you could before, when the age of technology hadn't progressed quite so far? Today we were in one of the houses where
had sessions with kids to read, and they could not have any technology around. They had to read books. And I think that books become so important because they're not just, they're an object. You touch them, they're so sensual. You play with them, you have memories with them. So I understand what you're saying. And I think that our youth, like all human beings, have these sleeping passions in them. It is up to us to awaken them. I really am amazed sometimes when I go to universities and give talks. And later on, the students come and complain about how their parents or their teachers tell them, don't go into English because you won't make money. Or go into Middle East because you can go into the State Department. Don't go into Middle East because you love to know about them. Go because State Department employs you. No wonder our foreign policy is so bad.
We'll stop Your Excellency, the last question, please, because later on we'll have signature of some of your books outside.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ms. Nafisi, we are honored here to be with you and listening to you.
Thank you.
I'm a former diplomat, and I always came across people from Iran, official Iran, that I have worked with and tried to work with nowadays. But I've read, of course, Republic of Imagination, and you made me go again and try to read Haften, a book that I read in my childhood, Haften. And Huckleberry Finn,
yes,
mentioned
yes.
And the way I saw how you explained life in America, although how you explained the beginnings of that country, also caught our imagination. And
yes.
It wasn't something that we have read previously easily as you have explained. I have a question. Talking about Iran, there is Iran and there are the people living in Iran today. That's the nation of Iran that's built on the foundations of their Persian background. And then there is the diaspora.
Yeah.
Iran abroad, Iran in America, Iran in France, Iran in... How do you see the output coming out? Does the output from people under repression still continue? Does it still resist? Is literature one of the form of resistance by sticking to it? And how do you see the output from Iranians who carried Iran in their heart and mind, like you, and lived abroad? How do they add to Iran and the culture of Iran as a nation that nobody can oppress it? Thank you.
First of all, thank you for mentioning Republic of Imagination and Huckleberry Finn. I am so amazed by American literature, the fact that it always brings the most marginal people to the center. And you are right. We as immigrants go to America because it was based on an idea. And as for Iran, I have never lost hope in the Iranian people. From the very moment, and you know, I'm not a political person. I don't belong to any political group. I have political opinions, but I don't belong to any political group or organization. But when my dignity as a woman, as a teacher, as a writer, as a supporter of human rights is attacked, it's existential for me. I stand up no matter where I live, you know, and that is why I wrote about Iran the way, I mean, the situation in Iran. You asked if literature is a quote.
I compared between
the output from Iran today and the output in the diaspora, which one really preserves?
The one that preserves, it always comes from within the country. It always comes. I mean, right now, Iranian people have been in the streets since November. And at least 1,500 have been killed, but they're going on. It comes from within the country. And the civil society in Iran is so strong. You know, I think in Middle East and in Iran, the people are examples to the world for the way they are supporting the freedom of choice. And I think that they will play a great role in reminding the world of what it means to become democratic. And Iranian people within the country, inside the country, I am only a voice. They are the ones who are doing the fight.
Thank you again. Thank you for having accepted the invitation of your center. I would like to finish with hope. Hope to see you again soon in Bahrain.
I hope so. I hope so.
شكرا. توقيع بعض الكتب في الخارج. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
I'm so blessed to be here.